morning and welcome to Skipton Baptist Church. Today we are continuing our series on encounters with Jesus. We learnt from Catherine in week 1 that Jesus is inclusive and that he does not exclude anyone. We learnt from Martin that Jesus can reform and change us. And last week we learnt from Phil that encounters with Jesus can renew and revive us. Now as we go further into this series, I think we'll see some overlaps as we are all talking about the same Jesus. Yes, in different encounters, but still the same Jesus, as he is the same yesterday, today and forever. So as we look at our next encounter, we will see new facets of Jesus' character, but we will also continue to see Jesus including, reforming and renewing. Now, many preachers start their sermons with a thought-provoking quote from a great theologian or a scholar from thousands of years ago. Sadly, I am not a great professor or historian, but I can quote from a movie about a man named Christian, an English writer who travels to Paris to be part of the Bohemian Revolution. He visits the city's biggest nightclub, the Moulin Rouge, and there falls in love with its star performer, a courtesan named Satine. In this movie, the Moulin Rouge, the most famous quote is, "The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return." And in today's passage, we are focusing on the encounter with the lady who loved. Firstly, I want to look at all the characters in the passage. Who are they? How did they respond to each other? And how did they respond to Jesus? And how has the love of Jesus transformed them in their lives and their behaviours? So as in many great movies that have a starring actress, in this passage we have many characters. Firstly mentioned, we have Simon. Now, sadly for Simon, he isn't the first Simon in Jesus' friendship group. So in order to distinguish him from amongst the others, he becomes known as Simon the Leper. It's not a great catchy nickname, but it's definitely one that would be remembered by others. Now it is unknown but also presumed that Simon may have been the leper that Jesus healed in Matthew 8, shortly after Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. We can somewhat presume this, that because if he'd still had leprosy, he would be judged as untouchable and unclean, and not a particularly desirable host for dinner. But here we have a man transformed with the love and kindness of Jesus, indeed the most miraculous power of Jesus, from leper and isolated to hosting Jesus and others in his home. Simon has gone from untouchable and isolated to included and favoured. The effect of Jesus on Simon's life is glaringly obvious. And isn't it wonderful to see what Simon is choosing to do with this feeling of being included? He is extending the invitation. He is including others, just as we saw in week 1 with Catherine. How often do we accept the joy and love and gifts that Jesus gives us, that too can be truly miraculous, and yet keep our doors and our hearts firmly closed, not sharing these gifts with others? Several times a day we sit at our table repeatedly thanking God for the food he has provided. But how often are there people at our table sharing this food with us? We thank God for our friends and our family, without a thought for the lonely among us. Have we become accustomed to accepting God's blessings without asking God how we can use them for his glory? So now we move on to our main character. We don't know her name. We don't need to, for it is her action that has made her famous. A woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. How does this woman's actions demonstrate her love for Jesus? Well, firstly, she came prepared. She was ready to worship, to give her all. She had a planned action. In her arms she carried the alabaster jar full of perfume. There is no evidence to presume that this woman had no idea of the cost of this perfume. It was a treasured possession. Imagine today buying something the cost of a whole year's salary. For many of us, we would only do this maybe once or twice in our lifetime, maybe for a car or a home. And then just to simply surrender this. This woman came to worship and to give a fitting sacrifice as she could. She came with an understanding of the God she worshipped. She clearly understood the majesty of Jesus. Perfume at this time was used on special occasions because of its value at weddings and burials. And to use some of your perfume would symbolise a great sacrifice that you were making. She could have just taken a few drops, but she understood that Jesus was worth far more. Her all was the only sacrifice suitable at this time. Many at the table did show great respect and adoration to Jesus. We don't know where each individual stood at this time with who they believed Jesus was. Maybe to some he was the anticipated Messiah. Maybe a great teacher or a prophet or someone to have great adoration for. The love and adoration this woman had for Jesus had gone far deeper than this. In understanding who Jesus was, drove her adoration into an act of worship. Now, it would be easy to get caught up here and presume that we must offer great financial sacrifices to Jesus. And for some people, this may be true. But we can see in other passages of Scripture, like in Mark 12, verse 41, that Jesus sat down opposite the place where offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more into the treasury than all of the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty. She gave all she had." Jesus cares about the position of our hearts and our willingness to give. He sees that we love him in this, no matter the cost. When we think of those moments so dear in our lives that we have felt the presence of God so closely and so deeply, when we feel that we have walked alongside Jesus and we dare not look to our side because we don't want that feeling to stop, how much are they worth to us? For me, I couldn't put a price on them. They are highly valued as they keep me in my faith. They keep me longing for more of Jesus and to feel that nearness once again. She came undignified and prepared for criticism. What the woman was about to do was obviously not common practice, but she showed no intrepidation in fulfilling her worship to God. No doubt, walking to the table, she was aware of the criticism and the judgment that was going to come towards her. Yet she made no comment in return. Jesus corrected the criticism for her. She was aware that the love of Jesus was far greater than the love of her peers and others at the table. But above all, she came to love. Her main desire, above all else, was to show her love to Jesus. That was her one goal. There was no other plan. The love and adoration she felt for Jesus consumed her. What an amazing witness to us all. How often do we live our lives representing that the love of Jesus consumes us? Surely that would have a massive impact on those around us. What would our friendships, our marriages, our relationships with our children and colleagues at work look like if our hearts were focused on being consumed with the love of Jesus? Now, so often in the Bible, we see many narratives that use a positive and negative example. We have the wise and foolish builder. We have Mary and Martha. We have the prodigal son and his brother. And I'm sure there are many more. That's a good car journey game for you, the next long journey you have. How many depictions can we see a positive and a negative example? How often do we talk to our children, or maybe it's just mine, where we say, please behave like this, please do this, but above all, do not do this. And as we grow, how often do we see others' negative behaviour and learn from their poor example on what we do not want to become, more than studying the behaviours of those who we aspire to be like? And Jesus is giving us this choice. At this point, I want to look at the remaining characters in the passage, who I have named the shushers. Here we see people who we have to bear in mind are sat next to Jesus, behaving unkindly. It says in the passage that they were harsh and indignant. They sound delightful. Do you find it astonishing that they behaved so poorly right in front of Jesus? Imagine getting a hard stare from Jesus. I can't think of anything worse. But yet, don't we have to acknowledge that we are in the same position? Jesus is with us always, and he is seeing our most unsightly. How often are we so keen to be right, to disprove someone else, that we will have our say, that we will put a better point across than you? We may feel ashamed of our lack of action, but rather than acknowledge that feeling, we do the next best thing, which is to tear that person down and discuss between ourselves how we might have done it better. Now, to be fair, the shushers, their point wasn't wrong. It is good to give to the poor. There are several passages in the Bible where Jesus commands us to care for them, but we have to look at their intent. They sat at the table, offering nothing. They were questioning the woman's sacrifice, where they had brought nothing other than their desire to be right. When I get to heaven, I'm going to have been right about some things, and I'm going to have been wrong about things. No, I take that back. I'm going to be wrong about a lot of things. And when Phil and Catherine get to heaven, they're going to have been wrong about some things too. And I stand behind this pulpit today and this screen, hopefully giving you a very simple message. One, because I believe the fundamentals of the gospel have been given to us as simply as possible that we might understand them. And secondly, because I will get things wrong. I did a year at Bible college in my early 20s, and I had a great lecturer. And one week for several hours a day we studied Revelation. By Thursday I had glazed over, and by Friday my head was in my hands. So I put up my hand and said to my lecturer, "But fundamentally, we cannot be assured of anyone's understanding of this, and no one really knows. Am I right?" Thankfully, my lecturer agreed with me, and thankfully we did not have to write an essay or do any further study on Revelation that year. We are not called to be right. We are called to love. I'll say that again. We are not called to be right. We are called to love. Being right does not hold much value if its only outcome is to dismiss others. These people had just witnessed an outpouring of love to the one most worthy, and their reaction was the opposite, to chastise and rebuke. I wonder where we would be sitting at that table today. Would we be a shusher? So often do we find people and their behaviour something to comment on. We may feel the need to comment if we feel they are acting inappropriately. How often do we look at people and their behaviour and seek for them to be more church appropriate rather than Christ appropriate? And as I was thinking about this, I thought it would be fun to create a Mr. or Miss Church Appropriate, a very strange Mr. Man book. And it goes a bit like this. Mr. Church Appropriate loves church. He comes appropriately dressed in his shirt and tie each Sunday. He comes, of course, with a very large Bible, with ample margins for note-taking. He loves to serve at church, and he loves to attend as many meetings as possible. Mr. Church Appropriate enjoys waking at 4:30 a.m. for a reflective time of prayer as he walks in the beautiful countryside. Mr. Church Appropriate doesn't waste his time watching Netflix box sets. He enjoys a good commentary and some in-depth Bible study. Mr. Church Appropriate has a very appropriate wife. She is a stunner, but so humble, patient and quiet. And together they have 7 children who have impeccable manners, who love to sing carols at Christmas in harmony. They are all so very church appropriate. And whilst we can look at Mr. Church Appropriate and chuckle, deep down, how many of us have aspirations of being Mr. Church Appropriate, without acknowledging that God has made us all extremely individual? I personally would love to be an early riser, and some of us do enjoy climbing mountains and feel the presence of God in that moment, whereas the same presence might be felt with a group of Christian friends sharing how God is speaking to them at the local pub. If I'm being brutally honest, I would struggle with the thought of sitting down and studying my Bible every morning. My morning looks a bit like shouting to my smart speaker to play some worship and sitting down with my children in the evening and looking at a Bible story. How often do we find ourselves rebuking others who don't behave the way we want them to, who aren't church appropriate, who haven't learned our way of doing things, who haven't learned what the church appropriate answers are? But what does Jesus command us to do? Command them to do? To leave her alone. Her way of worshipping was beautiful in the eyes of the Lord. Maybe we should learn to leave people alone a bit more before sharing our opinion, because maybe we could be wrong. When we look at our behaviour and the behaviour of the shushers, what does it say about their and our state of hearts? Are we consumed with our appropriate appearance, to be seen to be like others and to gain their approval? Are we concerned with others' approval rather than Christ's approval? And do we still feel the need to earn Jesus' favour by conforming to a list of self-imposed rules and regulations? During my time at Skipton Union in Scotland, I had the great opportunity of working with a group of young people from Easterhouse in Glasgow. Now, I'm presuming that not many of you have chosen Easterhouse as a holiday destination recently, but to summarise, it's quite a deprived part of Glasgow. And we would take this group of young people on camp every year, and we would see them change and evolve as the days and years went on. And one day, a 16 to 17-year-oldish lad, I can't quite remember his age, gave his heart to the Lord, and he was filled with such joy. And whilst Jesus had changed his heart, his language had remained. And it was honestly such a joy to hear his delight scattered with many a chosen word. Should we have shushed him? Should we have told him that now he must become very church appropriate? Would we choose to be those people ready to chastise and rebuke? In our Christian world today, have we forgotten that no matter how hard we try, we cannot win the favour of God by our appropriate behaviour? For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. This is the level of appropriate behaviour Christ is asking for. Now, of course, the Bible does give us guidance of how to live, but what is our greatest commandment? Our greatest commandment I give unto you is that you love one another as I have loved you. How did Jesus love all these people at the table? Jesus treated them all uniquely. And how can we learn from Christ's example on how to love those around us, thus demonstrating our love for Christ? Well, firstly, some, Jesus included. Love is not exclusive. We are all to follow Christ's example. We are to love all. When we hear this command, what first enters our mind? Sadly, it is not the ones we love, is it? No, that's easy. It's easy or easier to love them. No, it's the ones we don't like. Never mind love. But is God putting those people in our minds right now to confirm to us that that is not right? We have to learn to love. We might not love their sin, their behaviour, but we are commanded to love them. How often do we hear of people leaving churches because they didn't feel connected or they felt they weren't in the clique? Our aim is to love one another, not just every other. It's not easy, and Jesus knows this. He's lived here, but he still commands it. Why? Because love is the greatest thing of value that we can offer here in our church and to the world around us. Some he encouraged. Jesus encouraged the woman. While some were harsh with their criticism, Jesus encouraged her. Leave her alone, Jesus said. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing. How often do we choose to pick apart someone rather than encourage? Jesus wants to encourage us to be who he created us to be. God didn't make a mistake, and we should encourage one another to use our unique personality and skills. It is well known in education the term positive reinforcement, meaning that if you tell a child they're doing a great job, guess what they're going to continue to do? They're going to continue in that fashion. Isn't that what we want to see? People being encouraged to persevere and to grow. And finally, some he corrected. Sometimes we all need corrected by God. How often do we sit in these very church chairs and hear God saying, I'm speaking to you and you better do something about this? When we look at how love is described in the Bible in 1 Corinthians 13, we read that love is patient and love is kind. It does not envy, a correction in behaviour. It does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonour, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it does not keep record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Can we notice that the first two examples are explaining what love is? The remaining 14 are instructions to correct our behaviour, that we may love correctly. We need to be corrected. We need to build around each other in godly relationships, that we have space and trust to correct one another. That's a great time that we can have in our connect groups. We need to be willing to accept correction. We are all sinners and fall short of the glory of God. But we can, with such hope, look forward to becoming more like Jesus by listening to his direction to love, by our love being inclusive and by being corrected by his Spirit. Later it is spoken about in the end of the passage. Jesus showed his love for everyone around the table in the greatest way anyone has ever shown. He died for them all. Jesus' love goes beyond our understanding. It is abundant in grace. We will all fail Jesus, but his love will never fail us. Just as the woman showed Jesus adoring love, this was just a mirroring of the love he had for her in the slightest of ways. How loved are we? How precious are we to our Saviour? God demonstrates his love for us, that whilst we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5:8. Sometimes do we forget how loved we are? Do we chastise ourselves? According to research often cited in the National Science Foundation, people typically have 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day, and roughly 80% of those thoughts are negative, meaning that people could potentially think negatively about themselves thousands of times a day, depending on the individual or situation. I found a picture of myself recently, and I must be about 5 years old in this picture. And when I first saw this picture again after a long time, I thought, oh, she's adorable. And I thought about what I would like to tell that little girl. I didn't want to tell her all the mistakes she was going to make. I didn't want to tell her the hard things she was going to have to face in the next 30 odd years. No, I wanted to tell her what I want to tell my children, that she is loved, that I was proud of her, that she would see God move in mighty ways. And I thought about what I would say to people who were choosing to put her down. And God spoke to me and just told me and assured me, well, don't you speak about that girl like that. She belongs to me. How often do we come out of a meeting at work and think, man, I'm such an idiot? Or we can be sat at home and think, get your bum off the sofa. But we are children of God. The person that Christ suffered and died for. You are loved more tremendously than you will ever know. And that sacrifice demands our self-respect. No matter our behaviour at the table, no matter what character in the passage we can identify with ourselves today, we are all loved tremendously. And I think what I would like to leave you with today is just some thoughts to reflect on. Have you become too concerned with being church appropriate rather than our hearts being Christ appropriate? Are we more concerned to be right than to be seen to be doing the right thing than to love? And are we mirroring the love and grace that Jesus has given to us and those around us? Would we give anything to feel that closeness and love from Jesus again? Or would we love to feel it for the very first time? May I encourage you that if you've not felt that love, of that deep desire to have the love of Jesus fill your life, it is available for you today. And maybe Baz Luhrmann in the Moulin Rouge was right, but with a slight caveat. Maybe the greatest thing we'll ever learn is that you are loved by Christ and to give that love in return. Thank you.